Good day to you, intrepid YouTube surfer, wherever you may be. This is the Whiplash. This is Star Citizen Alpha 3.5 PTU, and we are talking flight model. So in my previous video, you'll recall I gave a quick overview of the new flight model that's been introduced with Alpha 3.5, how it works, what the changes are compared to the older flight model in 3.4 and previous patches. What I did not do was give you my opinion on it. So my likes, my dislikes, what there is that I feel can be improved upon, what did I absolutely love about it, and the like. And I thought that this would be a good opportunity for me to go and do exactly that. So I'm back at Port Olisar on the landing pad, sitting in the Aegis Ladius, and I'm going to take her out for a spin. And what I'm going to do is just chat and share some thoughts while we fly around. So let's get off the landing pad. I'm using decoupled mode to take off. This is a new favorite approach of mine. You get such nice soft landings and gentle takeoffs using decoupled. I literally just touch the strafe up button and the ship glides off the landing pad completely effortlessly. And then I go back to coupled, and then I can start moving around in whichever direction I please. So let's head off in a direction, and then we'll talk as we go. Alright, so to be honest, had I made this video a week ago, it probably would have been a lot different. There were a lot more gripes, a lot more things I was potentially unhappy about, but ever since then I've spent about a week playing around with this flight model, getting used to it, learning its ins and outs and how it works, and I have to say it's really starting to grow on me. It's not perfect by any means. There are still certain things that obviously they'll be working on, but the devs have said as much. There is still work that they want to do. This is just the first iteration of it, but I think that having now lived with it for a week and used it on various different ships, I think there's a lot of potential for something that is really enjoyable and challenging for us as players. So let me get the biggest issue that I had, and the thing that probably annoyed me the most, out of the way, and that is that the controls have changed completely. I don't know how big of a leap it's going to be for you as a keyboard player if you just use keyboard and mouse for flight, but if you are coming from a single flight stick, and potentially it could be even worse with the HOTAS, you will have to literally relearn everything. All of the default keybinds have changed. There are things that used to be bound which are not bound anymore, and that was probably for me the most difficult part in getting used to this. It's not necessarily that the ship flies a lot differently, it still works the way it used to in most respects, but because of the keybinds changing, all of a sudden the buttons that you're used to doing things have either moved or they just don't exist anymore. The biggest example, and I think the biggest frustration for me, was the throttle. So what I'm busy doing now is moving my throttle slider up and down to change my speed, and if I deactivate the speed limit, I've got even more throttle travel that I can play with, and I can move it up and down and control my speed to a nice fine degree, and that's great. But if you've got a flight stick, by default your throttle suddenly isn't bound to anything. So the throttle doesn't do anything. You can move it up and down, it does nothing. Throttle up and down by default are bound to the hat switch, forward and back, and that for me was a big thing. Because the hat switch obviously is a toggle, well, not really a toggle, but it's an on-off switch. You hit it and it's either full throttle or nothing, and that means that you don't get precise throttle control, and you have to use the speed limiter potentially to control the degree to which you are traveling forward. So I played around with various different approaches, trying to figure out, do I want to bind the throttle slider to the speed limiter? Do I want to leave the speed limiter on the mouse? I eventually settled for something that's very close to the throttle control I used to have, which is throttle forward is bound to my slider, so I can control my speed up and down by moving the throttle slider. Strafe, I just switch my speed limit back on. Strafe I've left on the hat where it is, so if I use the hat switch buttons I can strafe to the left and strafe to the right, and with hat back I can even strafe backwards. So that I've left exactly where it was as per the default key bindings, but I just could not get by without having my throttle button or my throttle slider working the way that it used to. That for me was an issue. The point is, it's something that you can get around. You can get used to it if you spend a bit of time learning this. I'm pretty sure you can come up with a control setup that'll work for you. The new system is very flexible, so I think probably an advantage of having rebound everything is the fact that you are going to have to sit and really think about where you want every keybind to be and what you want every button to do, which is not necessarily a bad thing. You might end up with something that works even better for you than it used to. So it's taken me about a week's worth of fiddling, but I think I finally got something that I'm happy with. So I can strafe and I can control my throttle, and if I want to go faster, I've used the hat forward button to bind the speed limiter toggle. So if I just toggle that off, I can accelerate all the way up to maximum speed. This is one of the things that I really like about the new flight model. The ability that you have to just seamlessly accelerate all the way up to your ship's maximum speed and still be able to make maneuvers. So here we go, I'm turning, and obviously even though the ship is struggling a bit because I've got a lot of forward momentum, and that means my maneuvering thrusters are fighting to try and keep my nose pointed in the direction of travel, I can at least make turns at this kind of speed. Whereas in the previous model, what would have happened was you had to, in order to hit these speeds, you had to use the afterburner. So you go out of, oh well, not out of SCM mode because there was no more cruise mode, which was in an older version of the game, but you had to hold down the afterburner button until you hit your maximum speed. And at that point you had to literally take your hands off everything. If you went anywhere near the controls, the ship would just slow back down to SCM speed, which was really frustrating because what I would like to do is accelerate up to speed and then hit my external view in order to get some nice panning exterior shots, which if you watched my videos previously you will know I like to do. And then if I accidentally touch the stick, the ship just slows back down again, and then you have to hit afterburner and accelerate all the way back up again. That doesn't happen anymore. You can happily cruise at your maximum speed all day. You can move the controls around and the ship will just keep on going until you throttle it down. So that I really like. That for me is one of the biggest pluses. The other thing that they've done that's interesting is because of the speed limiter, because there's no landing mode anymore, the undercarriage or the landing gear is completely independent of whatever speed you're going at. So I'm flying hell for leather. I'm going at 1,200 meters a second flat out, and my landing gear is still down because I simply haven't retracted it. So now I just hit the in button and the landing gear comes back in, and it hasn't done anything to my flight speed. The ship just keeps on going. I haven't changed flight modes or anything like that. It's a completely independent function, which is what I also like. Probably the thing that I enjoy the most about this model, and we're talking about space combat for them, or space flying for the moment, is, and this is something that's difficult to quantify, but I think you'll sort of get, if you try it yourself, you'll see where I'm coming from. It feels visceral. It feels as though you are flying something that has substance, which I really enjoy. The older model, the 3.4 model, and with older builds, the ships were incredibly agile. They literally turned on a dime, and you could throw the stick around in random motions and the ship would just tear across the sky in whatever direction you pointed, almost like you were sitting inside a turret and just moving the turret around and pointing your nose at things and shooting at them. And that was one of the major complaints that a lot of players, especially the more skilled players, had about the previous flight model, was that it didn't really take a lot of skill for you to aim at things because the ship would just go wherever you pointed it as fast as it possibly could. Not the very large ones, but most of the smaller ships tended to fly that way. Now, With the new model, that's not the case anymore because it's a lot more mains centric. Your main thrusters being the focus of the most of your engine output, and the maneuvering thrusters are quite a lot weaker. That means, and I mentioned this in the previous video as well, the ship is a lot more tail happy. It is drifty, so if you get up to a significant amount of speed, let's just accelerate a little bit, and I think I showed this in the previous video as well, you now try and turn. Now keep an eye on this little cursor with the arrow at the bottom, which is moving from the left. That's where my nose is pointed. Well, actually, no, sorry, my nose is pointing directly in the middle of my screen. That is my actual axis of movement, is that cursor with the arrow at the bottom. So that's the direction I'm going in, and you'll see if I make quick turns at high speed, it takes a while before my direction of travel catches up to where my nose is pointed. So the ship is resisting movement. I wanted to go in one direction, but because I've built up a lot of momentum, it takes some while for me to get back and go in the other direction. And that's not a bad thing. And you will see this especially with bigger ships and ships that have a very high forward to maneuvering thrust ratio. The smaller ships like the Gladius, which is a fighter, still handle very, very well, especially if you go down to your SCM speed range, which is below that little red notch at the bottom. Now if I throw it in one direction, my movement vector will catch up with my nose a lot quicker, and this is typically where you want to be if you're doing combat. Anything faster than that and the ship will resist turning. So the cool thing about this, it's up to you how you deal with it. You can decide how you want to fly. If you want a bit more speed, you can do that, but it comes at the cost of maneuverability. So it leaves things in your hands as a player much more so than previously, because you now really have to think through how the ship that you are in flies, and they feel very different compared to the previous model, where things could feel a lot, one ship was very similar to another, and I wouldn't say it was difficult for you to tell what you were in, but the handling wasn't as unique as you would think, and you can really feel that now. The other thing is the new sound design together with this flight model, it just blends beautifully. I mean, you can feel how the ship strains, especially if you're maneuvering at high speed, and you can hear the maneuvering thrusters screaming in the background trying to keep up. It makes for a very, very rewarding overall flying experience. So it feels very visceral. It feels like you are really flying something that has mass, that has substance to it. And if it's a little bit more challenging, that's okay. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it means that you really need to put some effort into learning how to fly the ship of your choice properly, because they're not all going to handle the same. You're not going to be able to just fling every ship across the sky like I'm doing now. Your actions will have consequences. And this, I think, will widen the gap between ships that are suitable for combat and ships that are just regular traders and multi-purpose vessels that aren't necessarily suited to quick twisting, turning dogfights. So some people might not necessarily like that, but I think that's been part of the pitch of the game since day one, is you can pretty much do whatever you want, but you need to pick the right tool for the job. So yeah, that for me is something that I enjoy, and I have to say I really like the way that the ships handle. I'm not sure I enjoy the tail happiness on the Aurora all that much, which is the one that I fly the most, but I can see the appeal in very maneuverable ships such as this one. But obviously, if the bigger ones are what you want to fly, or if an entry level ship like the Aurora, the Reliant might be in a similar position. I think the Mustang, which is the other, I haven't tried the Mustang in the new flight model yet, but that is probably a lot more agile out of the box than the Aurora is, so you shouldn't have any trouble flying a Mustang in the new flight model. I think that'll be quite a pleasurable experience because it's so agile. So that in a nutshell is what space flight feels like to me. What I would also want to talk about quickly, and to do that we are going to have to... Oh, I'm getting a fuel warning. I want to quickly... Okay, that's Microtech. I don't want to go there. Let me see if I can rather find it on the star map here. I want to pop off to one of the moons. Daymar is a good candidate because that has a nice dense atmosphere, so let's do that.
Quantum travel initiated.
There we go.
Quantum travel complete.
Alright, so... oh, this game never ceases to amaze. Got the star peeking out from behind the moon over there. You can see the atmosphere clearly, this thin little sliver of light. But okay, enough waxing lyrical for the moment. Let me quickly get down to the surface. There's now various ways you can do that. The new uninterrupted cruise, where you don't have to worry about the ship slowing down when you touch the controls, actually makes flying into atmosphere really easy. So maybe we'll do that and just cruise down to the surface for a moment or two while we enjoy the spectacle of the star coming out from behind the moon over there in the distance. Some good screenshot material here, but I've probably taken a million screenshots like this already. Just look at that. Now the other cool thing, of course, is I can turn a little bit if I want to change my direction without having to worry too much. Oof, I've pulled a lot of G's there. And that's also what happens, obviously, when you try and change direction at high speed, is you start pulling some serious G-force. Now I've got G-safety on, which is another thing you can disable, as was the case previously. It's your choice. If you want to take the risk of blacking out because you've been making some crazy maneuvers, you can do that. The G-safety is purely optional. I prefer to fly with it on. Maybe once I get very adventurous in future, I will start turning G-safety off, and then it's up to you as a pilot to make sure that you don't exceed the G-safeties and black out in the middle of a dogfight, because that would typically not be good. Alright, there we go. So my atmospheric readouts on the HUD have now turned on. It shows me my altitude as well as my terminal velocity, which is the safe speed that you can fly it in atmosphere. Currently it's still a lot higher than my current speed, but as terminal velocity lowers, your speed should start lowering along with it automatically, because the ship tries to slow down to prevent you from going too fast in atmosphere. Alright, so let's slow down a little bit more until we've got the atmospheric entry to a sensible point, and I'm not going to crash into something. There we go. So wind noise obviously has picked up. So just talking about atmospheric flight a little, it's difficult at this point to be 100% sure how much work has been put into the atmospheric flight model. I know that there are aspects of it that haven't been completed yet, but ships like the Gladius, and I've tried this with the Arrow as well, are an absolute joy to fly in atmosphere. You can pull some really crazy stunts, and I love the tail slidiness when flying in atmosphere. That is one thing that I really enjoy. So if you get the speed up a little and you chuck it off to one side and it drifts sideways, I mean, these are the kind of maneuvers that you'd probably never be able to pull in a real airplane, because it obviously only has thrust in the one direction and it doesn't have maneuvering thrusters on the side. But I can pull a tail slide and then use the maneuvering thrusters to straighten myself out again. So atmospheric flight for me, at least in an aerodynamic ship, is very enjoyable. Look how nice and big those tail plumes are now. You can see the vapor trails from my flight surfaces as well. So once again, it feels more alive. It feels, I mean, the ship's vibrating and shuddering, and it is just great. It's great fun in atmosphere. It feels to me a lot more like a proper atmospheric flight model than it did previously. So this is one aspect of the new one that I really enjoy. Now the Aurora looks and handles a little bit like a brick. If you fly one of those, your experience is probably not going to be as good. But still, it's something you need to get used to. So don't think you're going to chuck a ship like the Aurora all over the sky like a fighter when you're flying in atmosphere. It doesn't work all that well. And one last thing before I sign off, this is once again turning into quite a long video, but I hope it's been useful. Atmospheric entry and exit with the new flight model is a ton easier than it used to be. So on the moons it's not all of that bad, because generally the moons have, because they're small, they have a fairly thin atmosphere. On a planet like Hurston, when Hurston was first introduced in the game, getting out of Hurston's gravity and outside of the atmosphere so that you could initiate quantum travel was a chore, to say the least. It could take maybe 10 minutes if you're in a really big ship like, let's say, the Hammerhead. I had the unfortunate chore of flying a Hammerhead out of atmosphere at some point, and it is just, it's not a fun experience at all. Now you literally just, I say, okay, let's turn the speed limiter back on so that I can, there we go, there's the disc of the star way off in the distance. Now notice how quiet it goes when I slow down. So the wind shear and shudder, because of wind resistance, is really noticeable with the new flight model. It just makes it such a fun experience. Oh, this feels fantastic, it really does. So, but now if I want to escape back into space, literally all I have to do is point my nose up, disable the speed limiter, mash the throttle to the stops, and just let it go. I don't have to worry that it's going to slow back down. As I've mentioned before, I can still maneuver around a little bit if I want to change my vector. The ship will keep on climbing. As my terminal velocity increases, the ship will just keep on accelerating until it hits maximum velocity. I'm up to full speed already, 17,000 meters and climbing. Moon is falling away behind me at a rapid rate. On the bigger planets, obviously this will take longer, but it is so much less of a chore. And there we go, back in space. Right, so that's been my, I would say quick, but it's not really. It's been a it's almost 25 minutes now, and I'm reading out from deceleration, pulling 6 negative G's. That's been my summary of my thoughts about the new flight model. I hope that this will have been useful to you. If you have some comments or questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. If you have any questions around specifically key bindings, if you have a single flight stick, I should be able to help you get something set up that'll work for you. Mouse and keyboard probably as well, although I'm not such an authority on it. The HOTAS, sorry, you're on your own. I'm pretty sure there'll be lots of other folks out there that have put something together for Hota's flyers. I don't have one, so unfortunately I wouldn't be able to tell you how to set it up, but with a flight stick I'm sure we can come up with something that works. Hope you enjoyed this. Fly safe, try not to crash into anything, and see you around the verse.